On a blue and balmy Sunday, someone drops dead in the Strand, and a man slips round the corner. People say, Macheath's on hand.
My good friend ERIC Bentley, the drama critic and scholar and translator of Bertolt Brecht, just celebrated his 100th birthday. I went up to visit ERIC in his apartment on Riverside Drive, and we're going to show you a little bit of my interview with ERIC Bentley right now. So, ERIC, we were just talking a little bit about your childhood. You grew up in, the town was Bolton?
Yes.
What kind of city was Bolton back then when you were growing up? Was it really still Victorian England?
What I remember was the years of the Great Depression of 1930. Mm-hmm. I was 14 in 1930, so as I grew up, I was a child of the Depression, and I shared all the illusions of the younger generation. We were going to abolish the two chief threats, which was poverty and war, and we thought we could do it within a few years. You can imagine how I feel when I look back from this year.
Did your family experience the Depression?
My father was a small businessman who didn't do badly. His firm was furniture moving, and that was not very affected, although he had more money in the 20s than in the 30s.
Right, right.
So that my eldest brother went through medical school with my father paying the fees.
During the Depression?
But I was told when I was 12 that unless I won scholarships, there was no university for me. So I had to win 2 scholarships to go to Oxford.
In the 30s, before World War II, you were a pacifist, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
in the 30s, yes.
Right. And when did you change? Because you did serve in World War II.
When the military call came, we were going to volunteer to ambulance service.
Right.
But otherwise, as a conscience, was objected to the whole thing.
Right.
While I was here, I changed my mind as the war went on, and England was threatened with extinction.
From Mr. Hitler.
Yes. I let myself be available to the American draft when that happened, and I was rejected as a homosexual.
Oh, really? You were.
So as I got my whole thing together to go with the war, they wouldn't take me. I said at the time, they'd rather lose the war than win it with my help.
Where did you spend World War II? Did you go back to England or did you stay here in America?
I stayed and took one job after another, first in California.
If I'm not mistaken, it was in California where you first met Brecht, right?
That's right. I had 1 year in California, UCLA. Dropped me as a dangerous character. And
what were you doing to cause trouble?
when they let me know they were not rehiring me at the end of the year, I said, why not? And they said, we don't have good reasons. So I went to the chairman and demanded reasons. And he said, you talk about sex too much in class. And I said, I wasn't aware of that. Can you give me an instance of what I said that was wrong? And he said, you were discussing Othello, and you were talking all the time about adultery.
What the hell did they think the play was about? A handkerchief?
To say Shakespeare began it.
It's his fault, not mine. What was Brecht doing out in California then when you met him?
He'd only been in America a few months and was dependent on German friends among the actors and directors. And this was the period when I got to know him through a student that introduced me. I never heard of Brecht, although I was something of an expert on earlier German literature.
Right, but you had not seen or heard or read any of his plays at that point.
No, I was being introduced to a refugee writer who was hard up and needed a translator, presumably free, which I was for a long time.
Was he a seductive person?
Well, to me he was, but not in the sexual sense.
Yeah.
Many people hated him. He was that kind. Some people were fascinated by him. That included me.
Yes.
I gave him more attention than I have to any other writer. He gave me on a very thin paper some poems, and those were the first things I translated. Then later he sent me the manuscript of two plays which are famous today, The Good Woman at Szechuan and the Caucasian Chalk Circle.
Sure, yeah.
And I did both of those a year or two later.
How was his English? Could he work with you on the translation at all, or were you free to do what you wanted to do?
If you've heard his recording for the Un-American Committee, you heard a heavy German accent. He actually knew more English than you would think because he suffered from insomnia, and what he did was read detective novels in English, and he'd read a lot of those, and he began to be interested in hesitantly reading the English classics like Shakespeare. When he came before the committee in middle 40s, he had an interpreter. He didn't really need it. That was for show.
Right, interesting.
To be the German that didn't understand. Gave him time to think of his answers.
Clever, very clever. Tell me a little bit about Eisler, because this CD coming out is the music of Eisler, and you were a friend and a champion of his for years.
Well, all older people remember Eisler because he was in the headlines all over America for a brief period when his brother was found to be an agent of the Soviet Union. That was when he was working in Hollywood.
Right.
And he came before the committee, and his music was known to professional musicians like Leonard Bernstein, who was afraid of playing it because he was under observation, surveillance by the FBI. It was mainly a political phenomenon. But I became aware that he'd done more in the interests of Brecht and was a great admirer of Brecht. His whole grown-up life, except at the very beginning, he worked on Brecht poems and plays. It was a far bigger story than the Kurt Weill.
Yeah.
Which produced a couple of masterpieces.
Yeah.
But then they went their separate ways. Whereas Eisler stayed very close to Brecht. He adored Brecht.
Whereas Kurt Weill despised Brecht.
Weill thought he was an unpleasant man, but gifted writer.
What did Lotte Lenya think about Brecht?
She hated him, a very bad man. I think there was a fundamental difference in character between Kurt Weill and Lotte Lenya on the one hand, and Brecht and his various women on the other. They were two different mentalities.
Just a couple last thoughts, Eric. This is coming up on 100 years for you.
Yes.
Any? Is there a secret to it? I mean, any advice you can give a 50-year-old like me to clock another 50 years on this planet?
No.
It just happens?
No, it's something that either happens or it doesn't happen. Nobody knows. If there's a secret, it's a secret from us all.
You have no fear of death, right? We used to talk about this.
No, I don't believe in an afterlife. I think that's a great fantasy. So I'm not afraid of hell. I don't think there is any such place. So this means there is only death itself to be afraid of, if you are. Death itself is just something that happens, after which you are nothing, and expect to be nothing. My favorite remark about death was made by Lytton Strachey, whereas he lay dying. He said, "If this is death, I don't think much of it."
Excellent. All right. I think we have enough there.